And welcome back to the Luke Deckard Show. I am your host, Luke Deckard, and with me tonight, I have Chris McDonald. Chris McDonald he's a writer. He writes books of crime of a crimey nature, um, teaches or taught or teaches and taught, and also is jumping into the podcasting sphere, writing scripts. Tonight we're going to be talking about Chris's top six. It's an interesting top six because it's not just three books and three films or three, three of each kind. There's a bit of a mix. We got a couple of books, couple of films, a TV show, and even an album. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, so Chris, obviously I gave a little bit of information about who you are, but tell the listeners who you are, what you write, a little bit about what you do.
So I'm Chris McDonald. Hello, nice to see you all. I've written a couple of series of books. So I started off, my debut came out 3 years ago, roughly around this time actually. It was called A Wash of Black, and it was the first in a trilogy of sort of police procedurals following Detective Erica Piper. I quite like things in threes, so I thought once I got to the third, that was a pretty good place to sign off. So that was fun. And then the third came out around the time the first lockdown hit, and it felt like people weren't up for gory or particularly nasty stuff anymore. People wanted a bit of chilled, I think. So I wrote cozy crime novellas, and there were 6 of those, and they were really nice because a lot of the research that I had to do for the Erica Piper books where I'm a squeamish man, and some of the stuff I had to subject myself to. So I made the main character in my cozy crime series, the Stonebridge series, afraid of blood.
Nice.
So much more like me. Which meant I didn't have to do all the gory stuff, which was lovely. So I did that. I did 6 of those, and that was really fun. And then I fancied going darker again. So I wrote a PI novel set in Colorado, and that came out November time, I think. So yeah, that was called Little Ghost, and that was a lot of fun to write.
So the PI, because it's interesting that you've written kind of the 3 main crime genres. You got your police procedurals, your PI, and then the cozy stuff. What was the inspiration? Because the hard boiled PI stuff that's my jam. My entire PhD is on hard boiled fiction, so I love that stuff. What inspired you to want to write a PI novel?
I read a book by Jonathan Ames called A Man Named Doll, and it's about this private investigator who loves his dog, and it's a hard thing to explain because the plot is wild, and it just felt like there were no rules. And I think with UK based police, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of procedure to follow, and if you wrote about all of that stuff, it would be really boring.
Yes.
So there's ways to make it exciting, but there's always ways that if you don't get it right, readers will let you know. Whereas with this, it felt like there were no rules. He could go off and do whatever, and because he works for himself, he can get into trouble with the law, but he's sort of free to roam, and I really like that. So I thought I'd go stateside, and it was probably the most fun one to write. Actually, it just felt like it flowed, and it was fun.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of that stuff. It was interesting that over the lockdowns that you kind of turned to golden age kind of stuff, because again, what's interesting about the research that I'm doing is I have to sort of look at the transition between golden age, British golden age, into the hard boiled. What triggered the Americans to want to write hard boiled fiction and step away from the golden age stuff. But what was fascinating to me is that in all my research is reading about golden age. It's sort of those sorts of books in a big way don't really address social issues. They're very friendly and safe and about restoring the chaos that is life. So So it was really interesting to me because, again, this is kind of almost 100 years to the dot, right? Where when COVID struck, that we're back to like another pandemic, and also kind of a shift in literary tastes. So it was interesting to me that 100 years ago, people were actually turning to crime fiction for escape. Dorothy Sayers was famous for saying that this is all about escape. Raymond Chandler's like, you don't know what you're bloody talking about, lady. But it's interesting to me that I sort of began to understand a little bit better why so much golden age stuff really doesn't address the big social issues, because people weren't, at least in Britain, weren't interested. They needed something that was levity. So it's interesting you and loads of people, lots of people did the exact same thing, and I think rightly so.
Yeah, it felt good, and I said it in Northern Ireland because I couldn't get home. I live in Manchester now, and all my flights were cancelled, and anytime I tried when there was a little break, they'd be cancelled again. So it was my way of sort of getting home and getting down the streets that I used to walk down and stuff. So it was nice for me as well.
Yes. And your most recent book is Whispers in the Dark, correct? Am I right?
No, that was the second Erica Piper. Little Ghost is the most recent one.
Is it?
So Whispers in the Dark was reissued.
Okay. That's why.
As ebook. So my publisher and another publisher sort of agreed a sort of ebook thing where they merged. So they're rebooting out all the ebooks. So yeah, Whispers in the Dark probably was reissued with like a new cover for ebook and stuff. So that's probably the one.
That's why I got confused on that. Okay, right, because I remember like the PI book came out a few months ago, and then I saw that, I was like, wait, is it new one already? He's like, this guy works fast. But anyway, let's crack on with your top six. So the first one that we have tonight is the book We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker.
Yeah.
So this is a 2020 novel, which is interesting to me. I'm not surprised. That's not the right word. I'm fascinated that both of your books are ones that are quite recent. When I've spoken to other people, they tend to pick, they've picked chosen books that are kind of old and famous. So it's kind of fun to find these are like brand new, hot off the press, the paper's still warm. Books. So We Begin at the End was a winner of the Gold Dagger for best crime novel, which is a huge award to win through the CWA. For those who don't know, the CWA is the Crime Writers Association. And the novel tells a story about a police chief whose childhood friend has returned from prison after 30 years. So, Chris, tell us why We Begin at the End is on your top.
Well, my wife asked me just before, she's like, have you prepared anything? And I said no, because I assume it will come, and nothing has. No, I'm joking. We Begin at the End. It's interesting that you pointed that out as well about recent books, because it is a thing that I was always a reader, and when I was sort of starting to think back about books that I had read, there's a lot of gaps that I had. Like, I remember loving the Harry Potter books when I was younger, and then there's a sort of space where I don't really know what I read, but I did, and it's I don't really have any of those books anymore. It's like most of my books are, so I don't really know. Like, I went to uni and I remember a book called The End of Mr. Y. And it's really stuck. It was like a time travel thing, and it was wild. So a lot of what I read, I think thanks to Goodreads, actually, I can keep a track now. So that's probably why I've sort of got brain fuzz about anything else. And I think in about 2018, I made like a real thing about wanting to read more and to keep track. So I became a book blogger, if you can become one. I set up a Twitter account and started to review books on a blog.
Yes.
I got invited onto like blog tours and stuff like that, and got to know people. So
Yeah.
that was the sort of turning point of my reading career, I think. And
Mhm.
if you can call it a career, I don't know if you can. When it's a pastime. We Begin at the End was the first book that really blew me away. In the sort of new era of me reading books.
Mhm.
It, I think, and this is what I quite like, that I don't quite remember the plot, but I remember certain bits in it that
Mhm.
that stuck with me, and one of them is the main protagonist called Duchess, and it's just so well written. I'd read previous Chris Whittaker books. The first one, which escapes me, but there's a character in it called Manny, and he's this like little. I think he's in his teens, but he wears a suit and he swears like a trooper, and he's just so well written.
Yeah.
So Chris Whittaker has got an absolute, like, the characters nailed down in his books, but Duchess felt like he took it to another level.
Mm.
The
What is
sort
it
of stuff.
about Duchess that you love? What is the thing about that character?
She's a little bit like Manny in the fact that she swears a lot, which I thought was quite funny. But she's just tough and vulnerable, and things have happened in her life that that have obviously affected her in some way.
Mm.
And she's been dealt a pretty rough hand, and she rebels against it a little bit, but she's also got a little brother who she protects fiercely. And it was just the sort of it was her, and it was also the American setting, I think,
Mhm.
like the sort of vast plains and the skies, and it was just so well described that you felt like you were there.
Yeah.
um so when I was thinking about this, I thought, what books have like left a mark on me in the recent times? And
Yeah.
this, I just remember finishing it. I think I've got two children, so I was trying to, and it was during lockdown. So I was just trying to find, when you're so close to the end and you're like, well,
Yes.
I just need to take myself away. So I
Yes.
think I had about 30 minutes, finished it. I was sitting just in my bedroom, finished it, closed it, and just wept like
Oh wow.
uncontrollably. So it's left an impression on me. And like I say, I don't remember too much about the plot, but
Yeah.
I think that's when you know a book has done something for you, when you don't actually remember the story, but you remember how it made you feel.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And kind of another reason why I chose it was, I mean, Chris Whittaker won everything that year. The Dagger, the Edgar, like so many awards. But he's also the most down to earth guy.
Mm.
We'd started a podcast called the Blood Brothers podcast, sort of
Oh
April
yeah.
of the
Yeah.
first lockdown. And Chris Whittaker was like our sixth or seventh guest, and I just finished We Begin at the End, and I was nervous to talk to him.
Yeah.
But he was the first person to say, like, this is what I found. What did you guys think? And it felt like he was talking to me as a contemporary, and it just,
Right.
I just have such a lot of time for him. And anytime I've seen
Yeah.
him since at, at Harrogate or other crime festivals, he makes time for everyone, even though
Yeah.
he's a superstar. So yeah, him being nice has a lot to do with it. But the words on the page, it's
Yeah.
a book that I've been recommended since I've finished it. So it might be due a reread, actually, because really I was genuinely thinking, what can I say about it? And I thought, apart from Duchess, I don't really remember very much. So yeah, it could be time for a reread.
I think so. I think so. So this might be tricky because if you don't necessarily remember the plot but remember the feels, um, in terms of feeling, then not necessarily plot. What was it that, I guess you sort of touched upon it, but what do you think is it that stood out to you about this book? I mean, I get the vistas, the rolling, the landscape, all that kind of stuff, but maybe more emotionally or thematically, what stood out? What stood out to you?
Well, I think because I've been reading crime, or that was primarily my thing, and there is a crime in it, and it is considered a crime novel,
Yeah.
but it was more about the people and how, I mean, it's small town. There's a guy called Walk who's like the police chief that's pretty close to retiring, and he's been looking out for Duchess and her family.
Yeah.
So it's more, I mean, there's lots of exciting stuff that does happen, but it was more about the conversations that these people were having,
Yeah.
and it just felt like nothing I'd ever read before in a way.
Mm.
And it is that thing of, you can read really exciting books and it is, but it's more than that. It's how you each other leave a little mark on the other person.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting. And
Yeah.
Duchess, at one point, I don't think I'm going to spoil anything, but at one point the location changes and she's moved
Mhm.
somewhere else, and she has to come to terms with that. And sort of she had her life, and it was quite a damaged life where she was, and seeing her in a different situation, trying to make friends, vulnerable is the word that I keep coming back to with this.
Mhm.
And it just, yeah, the way she was portrayed in it, he just got her absolutely
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
There was nothing, like if you read a book sometimes where the character is perfect and then they do one little thing or they say something that doesn't seem quite, and
Yes.
it sort of takes you out a little bit, and it's very easy to do. But he was just pitch perfect with her, and I think
Yeah.
that's what really, really had her in my mind.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think some of the most memorable books, it's really not necessarily the plots that stick with me with certain books, but it is the character moments, those interesting back and forths, that sort of tension, sort of thing. I mean, I think I love The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, but I don't really ever sit there and think long and hard about the plot. I think about those interesting moments that Marlowe is up against when he's meeting these different characters. So yeah, so it's I totally get why, and I think the best books, you know, are like that, when you can go back to them because you're interested in the character dynamics, and it's not about the plot, because if it was about the plot, it'd be a one and done thing. You never want to go back to it. So yeah, so I totally get that with this particular book. So this is a firm recommendation.
Definitely, it's, yeah. It and the next book are the ones that I will, if someone asks for a recommendation on Twitter or somewhere, they're always the two that immediately those are coming out of my fingers on my keyboard.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Let's jump to your second. And we have Vine Street by Dominic Nolan. So again, this is a newer book. This came out last year, 2022, I think. Yeah. So this one follows Sergeant Leon Geets. Is it Geets? Is that how he pronounces his name?
I think so, yeah.
Sure. So he's a savage and sentimental guide to a lawless 1930s Soho, and he dedicates himself to finding a sadistic killer. Um, why Vine Street?
Um, Dom Nolan is he'd written two books in the series before,
Mm,
Afterlife and Past Life. I'm gonna that's
sure.
not right. They can't both have life in this thing.
Yeah.
Um, After Dark. Don't know. That sounds like a risque kind of book, and I don't know. But anyway, he had two in a different series, and they were great. So I was a big fan already, and on Twitter, he always came across as really supportive of new writers.
Mm,
He interacted with people, and so I thought, like, nice guy as well.
yeah.
So when I got sent a proof, and it dropped through my door, and it's like 500 and something pages, and it's a thick book.
It is.
Um, so usually those scare me because I think that's like a commitment, isn't it? That's like maybe 2 weeks of your life. Um, so I sort of set it on the side and thought I'll get to it at some point. And I read the first couple of pages and thought, oh yeah, I like this. And I finished it in like record time for a mammoth book. So yeah, with it felt like it's set in Soho, between I think in the 30s, and then it jumps to the
Mm,
60s and a bit of present day possibly. Um, he just nailed that time, and it really felt like you were there.
mm,
And he writes with such, it's like I don't. If I heard someone say this, it would put me off. But it feels like poetry, but it's not poetry. Every sentence feels like he's thought really hard about it.
Mm.
And I think it comes effortlessly to him, which is really annoying. Because it would take me years to write what he wrote. But yeah, you felt like the sort of dirty dive bars and the war sort of later on going around, and you just felt like you were there. And
Yeah,
again, with the characters, Geets is sort of loudmouth, witty, but really like a good cop.
yeah,
And it's a really interesting story. But again, it's the relationships that he has with those characters that really, really make you care.
yeah.
And there's a bit where I can't spoil it, but there's a bit where it absolutely knocked me for six, and I had to again, I'm gonna come across as a softie here, but I cried for a good amount of time and had to close it just because I couldn't see through my own tears.
Yeah.
But I don't, you know, when there's some bits that happen in books where you think, well, they're sort of trying for that reaction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can sort of see it building up. And you think, well, yeah, that's probably going to happen. And when it does, the payoff isn't quite there.
Yes.
Whereas with this, there were just times where I thought, well, that's completely out of the blue. And I might have seen it coming had I been thinking about it a little clearer.
Yes.
But it just absolutely got me. And again,
Yeah.
it's that feeling of how it made you feel. And it was probably, I mean, I got a proof, and I think might have been two years ago it came through, but I can still remember the feeling that I got as I finished the last page, and those are the things that stick with you. So yeah. Vine Street was an easy pick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love the cover for a start. That's what sold me on it initially. Not just the cover, because you don't judge a book by its cover, even though we all do.
We do.
But it's a great cover that I think really does capture the mood and the atmosphere of the book. What do you think that Dom does differently to other crime writers that makes this stand out?
I think his level of authenticity. You feel that, like, because I read recently. I started trying to read one of the Robert Galbraith stories that's like 1,000 pages.
Good luck.
Yeah, well, I had to give up because it felt like a walking tour of London, where it's like they went down this street and then they turned onto this street and this street, and it was like a page of just streets. So I was about 200 pages in and thought, I can't, like, life's too short. So he does not that, but for example, they'll turn out of a street in Soho and it will be so authentic. And when I went to watch him do a talk, he said he had like maps up of what what it would be that wouldn't matter to the casual reader, like, but just throwing in one street name of him climbing over, and you fully believe that that's what he would have done in that time. And I think that I like that level of research. And as a writer, I know what a pain that is. So I know why it takes him quite a long time to write his books. But it just felt like, what he was saying could have happened. And it just felt, because I sent him an early draft of Little Ghost. And he said, like, nice things about it, but he said one piece of advice: rub some dirt on it. Like it's too sanitized. So and this felt like that. You felt like the sort of dirty dive bars and the people and the sort of scumminess of London streets at the time. So everything just felt real, and I think that's the sort of best phrase I can give him.
Yeah, it is genuinely hard to do. I think when you're writing these books, you think, oh, I need to give detail. I need people to know where we are. Therefore, I need to literally tell you the map of where I'm going. I'm on X street, then I turn onto Y street, then I'll mention the boots over there. When actually you really don't need to do that. One or two little bits are more than fine. I remember really loving that with a completely different book, Rivers of London, I
Yes.
actually, for the way Ben Arnovich nailed placing you in London without making you feel like it's a tourist guide of London was spot on. It was perfect, I think. And I think this is another good example of a book that nails that. Because it is hard. You want the reader to be immersed in where you are, but you don't necessarily get that. Street signs aren't really the way to the way to do that. But it's trying to, if you can immerse the character in something on that street, like if you're in the 30s and someone's buying an apple from a veg seller, there's something there, or they're going to a specific place on that street. That's how you interact with it. But it is hard. It is hard to do. And I totally agree with his advice. Rubbing some dirt on the story is good, because I think that's another thing that is actually very good advice, because I don't know how you feel, but sometimes when I'm reading books or even watching shows or films, sanitize is very good, and this in light of the Roald Dahl drama,
Yeah.
sanitizing is a big issue. And there's too many people trying to write safely
Hmm.
when storytelling has never been safe, ever. And so I think, life is grim, life is tough, life can be dirty. Our story should be the same. So I think it's good advice, Dom, if you're
Yeah,
listening.
absolutely. And it also features one of the greatest chapters. It's a 2-word chapter,
Amazing.
and it is simply Birmingham bollocks, which fits with the story, and
That's good.
not degrading to Birmingham in the slightest, because it comes out very well. But
Yeah,
just funny that the character has to go there, and he's like, "Ah," but I thought it was brilliant.
that's funny. No, that is funny. Um, yeah. So okay, what in particular, is there a scene maybe that stands out to you in this book that kind of lives in the back of your mind? It's okay if there's not, or maybe a line of dialogue other than Birmingham bollocks. So you've done dialogue. So is there a scene then? Is there a scene?
There is, and I don't think I can talk about it because of giving a massive thing away.
Right.
But I remember, like it came out of nowhere, and there's one line in the middle of that I remember word for word. And again, I
Yeah.
can't say it because
Yeah.
it'll give it away. But just that line in the middle of everything else, it's like sort of action, action, action. Then this one line that just completely blew me open. And yeah, made me just think like it made me think about how he did it, and why he did it. And
Mm.
it was just such, again, vulnerable comes up, but it's just such a line that, like 2 years later, whatever, I can still picture those words on the page.
Yeah.
So that's something. But yeah, it's there's funny bits in it as well. I mean, there's, in the characters he creates, there's like the sort of miscreants of the back streets of London, and there's
Mm.
the tough cops, and he just gets the mixture so right. And then, it's actiony, and it's soft in places. It's just where the tone needs to be right.
Yeah.
He's got it right every single time. So he's got it.
And how do you think in terms of the juggling of time, because it's 1930s but jumps to is the 60s or 70s? I can't
I
remember
think
now.
it's the 60s, yeah,
60,
60.
like 63 or something like that.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
How do you feel that handling of two time periods works?
Really well in this, because often, and the first chapter is actually 2002.
That's
So
right.
3. I'm not sure how often it comes back to that. There are books where I've tried it, where I've thought, I just want to know what's happening in this timeline rather than ahead. But I think he handled it really well, because I can't remember a time where I thought,
Yeah.
there are definitely times, and it's more, I think it's psychological thrillers, and it is for a sort of purpose of that suspense of, well, we've left off here, so you're definitely going to have to keep reading to get to the bit that you want to read.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works brilliantly, and sometimes it's a crutch almost. But I think Dom, yeah, like I said, I can't remember any point where I thought, I wish it was this bit. And I think, to be fair to him, it's pretty sparse. I think it's mostly set in the 30s.
Yeah.
With just a few bits. So I think those bits elevated it rather than, dragged it down.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. No, because I remember this is probably to the extreme, but I remember trying to read Cloud Atlas.
Yeah,
nope,
no.
I never finished that. I never finished it. I never will.
No, there's some that I think, and maybe it's because people are too cleverer than me that I think, well, my head, I can't get around it.
No.
It's just confusing me. So again, I always think there's just millions of books, and you're never going to get to half the ones that you want to in your life. So
yeah.
Do you have a rule? Do you have a certain page that you get to and think, well, that's it, or do you get the feel of a book pretty early on?
If I am bored by, it really depends on the book. Generally, I will give it 20 to 40 pages. And then I'm done. I remember because you mentioned it earlier. I bought the first Robert Galbraith book when it first came out. And I think that was a page 20 and I was done.
Yeah.
And then I never went back. I never needed to. But yeah, I'm sort of around that limit. How generous are you?
Similar. I mean, well, I said earlier that there are too many books, but I'm also really I try to be generous for the ones that I'm not quite enjoying. So maybe like 50 page. I guess it depends. If it's like a huge book, 50 pages. If it's like a novella, less kind of thing. But generally I try to give it about 10% and think if it hasn't got me in the first 10%, then it probably won't.
Yeah.
And there are anomalies to that. The book I'm reading at the minute is I purposely joined a crime. Oh well, not a crime book club. I purposely joined a book club that wasn't crime. This month, I joined the other day, and our first meeting is in a couple of weeks' time. And I did it because I love crime, but I also want to read further. But it's hard because if you're so entrenched in one genre and you know who's good and what ones to look out for and stuff, you can miss a load. So the book I'm reading at the minute is called The Slow Worm Song. And it's a letter from a man to his daughter, who he's sort of not in her life as much as he wanted to due to his actions in the past. But it's slow, and I just think it's brilliant. So sometimes it pays to give it a little bit more, because I think if I'd seen it on Twitter or whatever and I didn't have to read it to go and discuss it, part of me thinks I probably might have given it up. But because I know I have to read it, I'm really pleased I did. So sometimes the ones that you think, ugh, the payoff comes.
Do you ever find when you're writing some of your stuff? Obviously, you mentioned that you read a lot of crime, and again, I think we both probably end up reading a lot of crime. But do you ever find when you're reading something that's not of that genre that actually that has is potentially more inspiring for your work?
Definitely, yeah. Because crime, to a certain extent, follows, especially police procedural, which is probably my main thing, but crime solving, puzzles, red herrings, usually the criminal gets caught, happy ending. But with other genres, I mean, the way that things are described, places, and it's again, I'm going to use the word poetic, but I'm not sure that's the right word. But instead of crime scene, here are the main parts. Other genres where it's slower, they don't have to be so quick in their, they can describe the more lyrical parts of a house. Or I mean, Mick Herron is very good at it, and I know we're back to crime with Mick Herron, but each of his Slow Horses books start with a description of the the offices that they're in.
Yeah.
And the way that he does it every time, like I think one of cats going around the house or a breeze of wind or something like that. So there are definitely crime books that do, but I think, yeah, definitely reading outside your genre, that your usual genre really, is paying off, because I've not done it but this is sort of, and I'm not exclusively crime, because I do go off and read non-fiction and stuff.
Yeah.
But this just feels different to anything else, and slower and more peaceful and things like that. And also it's set in Northern Ireland partly during the Troubles.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting for me from that point of view, because obviously I lived through part of that, but sort of not really in the worst part. So it's interesting to hear how a British soldier's side of it kind of thing. So yeah, it's I think there's definitely certain parts where I think, well, in my own book that I'm writing, maybe I can spend more time on that instead of just whizzing on to get to the fights or whatever, like people might want to just have a breather and think about the way a tree sways, or like little details like flowers sprouting out, or the colors, or how they something that I'll definitely take away things where I think, well, actually, I need to slow it down a little bit.
Yeah. No, I like that. Cool. So I think that's Vine Street, well covered. Another good recommendation from you there. And I just realized on the cover, there's a quote by Chris Whitaker, who was the first book that we talked about. That's funny. All right. So the next thing is we're moving away from books into music. So Fightstar. I said it correctly. I didn't say Firestarter. So you chose this album, Fightstar, The Grand Unification. I think it's like, what, 2006? I think this came out. Is that?
Yeah, it must have been.
Walk me through this album. How is of all the albums in the world, why is this one? You're bringing this one.
I am. And again, it's how I felt at the time. So 2005, 2006 is when all of us were sort of starting to pass our driving tests, leaving school. I went to uni in 2006. So it must have been a little bit before, or possibly the start of 2006. Charlie Simpson was known for Busted, who were, I loved and still love, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. And then he left and formed Fightstar. And I'm a massive fan of heavier music. I was into Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, all the big sort of metal bands.
Yeah.
And Fightstar were a band that the first time my friend Ross was the first one to pass his driving test of all of us. And the first time he came to pick us up to go driving to nowhere, we played Fightstar as a very purposeful, this is the album that will cover this time period. So I mean, it's a brilliant album, a really brilliant album, and very different to anything Busted had ever done. It's heavy, there's beautiful parts, there's sort of big questions asked in it. I think one of the songs, it might be Grand Unification Part 2, is a sort of piano ballad with just someone talking over it, with sort of wondering about like scientific thing. It sounds awful the way I describe it, but it's very good, and it's well worth your time. But it just felt like sort of bigger ideas and things like that. But mainly like the songs are brilliant, but it is about how, that time with your friends where you're growing up and you're not sure where your life's going. Like I went off to England, Ross stayed in Belfast, I think. But yeah, we were all sort of splitting up, and it was the first time, that people were going away from home and things like that. So yeah, that was like the sort of little bit of calm before everything changed, I guess.
Yeah, I can relate to that. When I was listening to it, because I listened to the album as well, and it had a very distinct 2005, 2006 sound. It and as I was listening, it did take me back to that particular time. And then so I just played it first, and then when I was listening to it, I was like, I need to look this up a little bit more. Then I saw the date, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. That sort of metal metalcore. It's almost metal, but it's not quite metal. It kind
Yeah.
of toes a line between we're a rock band, but we're gonna scream a little bit. Gonna have some drop D.
Yeah.
Gonna have the double bass every once in a while. We're gonna get a little crazy for for those bands that didn't want to. They wanted to still have their airtime, so they didn't have just a little bit of craziness. Which reminded me of a couple of bands like things like Disciple, and I don't know if that's a pretty niche American band actually, but or like who else, like to some extent maybe things like Bullet for My Valentine,
Yeah.
a little bit
Funeral
of
for a Friend.
yeah. Which I thought was quite fun. So this is a very nostalgic album for you then, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, when I listen to it, all it does is take me back. I still think the songs hold up, though. I think their second album was pretty good, and then I think the Busted were starting to get back together for bits and pieces, and Charlie was doing acoustic stuff at that time. So I think the first two albums were really concentrated effort, and then after that, it was kind of when he could squeeze it into whatever else he was doing.
Yeah.
But I think this one, there's a story that I really love about this, where while they were recording this album, Charlie was playing his last few shows with Busted. And there's a song on this album called Mono, which is beautiful, like really nice guitar parts, and opens up to this big expansive chorus at the end. But he was so into recording his guitar part for this that he didn't want to leave until he was finished, which meant he was late on stage for Wembley Arena.
Oh wow.
And I just thought at that time, where I mean Busted were huge, and it must have taken a lot of courage on his part. I mean, I know I've read subsequently that he hated his life at that point with Busted, but to have that financial security and adoring fans and stuff, and to put that all on hold just to record this guitar part really tickled me. So you know what went on behind, and I guess the passion that went into this album, and you can hear that in the words and the lyrics and things like that. So I really do think it holds up, and I still on rotation in my house.
No, it really was a fun album. One comment in the chat from Biffer the Hobbit. I don't know if he's serious or not. Says I only listen to music that I think he means talks. His takes talks about God, stars and stripes, and booze. I'm assuming it's a joke, or he means country music, Johnny Cash or something like that. But that is a funny comment, Biffer. So I really enjoyed this album. It was fun. It was fun to listen to, and even though it wasn't one that I grew up with, like I said, it did take me back. I was back to we must be similar in age, because I was finishing high school, and I was a couple of years out before I moved to the UK at that point, and big transition, couple of years there. So I relate to that. Do you have a favorite song on this album?
Again, it might be nostalgia talking, but there's a song. Well, there's two that stand out. So "Paint Your Target" was a single off it that that sort of had that loud, quiet dynamic, and I just remember, like, there's a particular stretch of road that I really remember the chorus hitting in, and all of us just like screaming it. So that, for like sort of nostalgia's sake. It's funny, isn't it, that like that hearing a certain bit can just take you to a certain moment. And I guess with all of the things that I've chosen so far, that's been a big thing. So there's that, Paint Your Target's one, and then there's another one called nope, don't know. I think it's track 8. No, it's gone. But it's a very good song, whatever it is.
Track 8 is good. Check out track 8.
Here, I can do better than that. This is Grand Unification. It's called no, it what? I'm confusing myself now. Lost Like Tears in Rain. There we go.
What was that again?
Lost Like Tears in Rain.
Oh, there we go.
Quality song.
What an emo title.
Yeah.
Lost Like Tears in Rain. Dear God.
Is it from a Chuck Palahniuk book? Faldanuk. Don't know how to pronounce it, but I think the first EP they put out was quite heavily influenced by like Fight Club and all that. So I think they
Right.
used a few of the sort of bigger ideas of Chuck in their work.
Right.
But yeah, that is the most emo title in the world, isn't it?
It just reminds me of "Bullet for My Valentine," the "Tears Don't Fall" or whatever that song was. Oh god, I love some emo music. I love some emo music. I think for me at that point it was maybe Under Oath or Story of the Year. The Page Avenue album was big
Yeah.
for me at this time. Are you musical? Do you play anything or do you?
I play guitar.
Mm,
I used to be in a band at uni, and we did all right for ourselves. Because I come from quite a small town in Northern Ireland, like right on the north coast.
yeah.
So moving to England was a big enough step for me. And then I went to Lancaster,
Mhm.
which is again like a university town in the north. But we got to play a couple of gigs in Manchester, and
Oh, cool.
I felt like I'd made it for playing
Nice.
these like sort of crappy little bars. But it
Yeah.
felt like a big achievement for someone that, Belfast, which would have been the closest place where anyone ever went, was like an hour and 20 minutes drive from home, which I know to an American is not anything to climb all to get to this city,
No.
but it felt massive to us. And so to go and play in like Manchester, and we played the Night and Day Cafe, and on the
Mhm.
walls they were like who'd played there before, and just felt weird going on the same stage. So
Yeah.
yeah, did all right. And now I can't really play for Toffee. I haven't practiced in so long that yeah, I've lost all my what I once had.
It's all right. It's like muscle memory. It'll come back. It'll come back.
Yeah.
Just pick up the guitar and bam, it'll be there. Well, after a few tries. Um, great. So that's Fight Star. We're now going to transition into the films and TV shows. So this will be fun. The first film that we're going to talk about is In Bruges. I said it correctly.
Well done.
Well done, me. Um, so this was an interesting pick. I'd never seen it. I'd never seen it. So this was I watched it for the first time for this for this podcast. But I want your opinions first. So what was it? What is it about In Bruges that you're like, yep, this is the film. This is one of my films that I'm taking with me.
Um, the whole thing is a bit surreal. I think it's brilliant that I mean, again, it's the people in it. Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell are the perfect casting. I don't know if the film could even have worked with two other people as those
I know
two
what you mean.
characters.
Yeah.
It's obviously quite a heavy subject, why they're in Bruges.
Yeah.
But I think just the interplay between them keeps the film so fun, and there's so many one-liners that it's hilarious. Like it really is hilarious.
It is.
Despite the sort of gunfights and everything else that goes on, it's just so funny, and that's why I keep going back. I mean, it's my, if you get a spare night or whatever, and you think, or you're doing something and you just have something on in the background, it will always be In Bruges for me.
Okay.
I just whack it on, and I know it so well that you're not even paying attention, but some of it is going in, and
Yeah.
just even lines I've heard like 20 times still crack me up, and yeah, I think it's just brilliant.
It is fun. What kind of struck me at first was there was almost a, don't get mad at me, people, but there was almost a Woody Allen aspect at first, in the way that he likes to show off his venue, where he is. If you think of Midnight in Paris, very very Paris. His Rome film after that, very very Rome. And I was getting the same kind of vibe with this. This is, it's not like a tourist advert, but it is very much, making the most of Bruges and its gothicness and medievalness, and really setting up the atmosphere of the place, which I really liked. I mean, it's I think, yeah, I don't know what's how do you feel that the way Bruges kind of was handled, like in the story? Like it's a character in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, especially towards the end
Mm,
when all that stuff happens. But yeah, I mean, at the start, Colin Farrell's character doesn't want to be there. So
yeah.
when Brendan Gleeson's character is taking him around, and he just looks miserable with his coat up, and he's sort of Brendan Gleeson. They go to see Jesus's blood at one point in a church, and Colin Farrell says, "Do I have to?" And it's just those little things
He's
where
like,
you
it's
think,
Jesus
like,
Christ's blood.
yeah, of course you don't have to. Of course you don't have to. Um, yeah, and I think it really made me want to go. So maybe on one level it did work as a tourist thing, because
Yes.
I would like to go and see like where stuff happened, and it does look beautiful. Um, but I think, yeah, like you say, it's a character completely by itself.
Yeah.
And probably some of the stuff that happens couldn't happen in other places. I think it seems like quite a gentle place, and I
Hmm.
think it's quite a touristy place now, but possibly not back when this was filmed, because I mean, they would have cordoned off wherever and things like that.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, it just feels gentle, and
Yeah.
obviously the stuff that happens there is not gentle.
No.
So maybe it's that juxtaposition that works, where you don't expect all this mad stuff to happen, whereas in London it might. So yeah, it could be about the location that's a massive part of it, actually.
Yeah. I think what was interesting to me is I really liked the way the movie is kind of constantly trying to decide, or rather, the character of Ray is conflicted with punishment and retribution. I think that's was such an interesting. It's done in an interesting way, and it's done in a subtle way. And if you look at the movie and you think, oh, it's about a couple of hitmen who. A job is botched and they got to go to Bruges, and some chaos happens in Bruges. You think it's going to be a kind of a loud action movie, when I mean really the first sort of what hour, it's like 2 hours long. The first like hour in a good bit is, it's actually just a really fascinating character drama
Yeah,
that for the last like 20-30 minutes becomes the action movie.
yeah.
But and so I found that really fun. um yeah, how do you, what's your take on that? Like the character of Ray and what he's going through. How do you feel about the way he was handled?
I thought he played it perfectly, because you can tell he's a sort of Jack the Lad character, where
Mm,
he gets on with that girl the first night, and sort of they're trying to lay low, and it almost feels like the other character, and I can't remember his name, but Brendan Gleeson's character,
Ray.
Ray.
Ken.
Yes, yeah, yeah, Ken. It almost feels like sort of almost father son,
Yes.
where he's sort of saying like, "Can I go and do this?" And he's like, "Well, if you promise not to moan about the things tomorrow, then yes, you can." And
Yeah.
um, I don't know the way that I think the older character Ken knows
Mm,
what the young one, even though he's not experienced it himself, you can tell he feels sorry, but he's also conflicted with his orders that he has to do. So yeah, I thought the way that Colin Farrell played it was brilliant, because he goes between euphoria at like getting a girl's number and coming back and sort of waking Ken up very immature, and then the next morning he's sort of morose, and so I just thought it was, yeah, I thought Colin Farrell played it perfectly.
yeah, I agree. Their interplay is perfect, and I have to agree. I don't know. eh, Maybe two other actors could do it, but this just seems like the perfect duo. I think on like a writing standpoint, it's a really tightly written script, that in terms of like setup and payoff is almost kind of master classy, right?
Mm.
And there's a number of things we could talk about, but like there's the guns, there's the Canadians, the he punches the Canadian lady in the bar, which is great. But one of my favorites is the at the beginning of the movie, Ken, Brendan Gleeson's character, wants to go up into the clock tower, right? And he tries to pay, and the guy won't take. He's like 10 cents short, and so the guy at the till won't take it, and he has to break like a 50 or something like that.
Yeah,
But what's so great is then at the end of that movie, that change is used to signify a very I won't spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but it's used as a warning that I'm like,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
That's great. I love it.
Everything's thought about, and that bit at the start, like there's little bits of dialogue peppered through it that are just brilliant. But
Yeah.
the bit that you were just talking about, where he won't take the 10 cents,
Mm.
and Brendan Gleeson has to break the money, and he just says, "Happy in your work," and the guy is like, "Very," and they part, and it's just so
Yes.
perfect. And I don't know if it's because, I mean, I grew up on Father Ted and other Irish comedies like that, so that
Yep. I love
I
Father
don't know
Ted.
if there's something about the Irish accent that is perfect for that sort of darker comedy.
Yes. I think so.
It's
I
quite
think so.
deadpan.
Say again.
It's quite a deadpan
Mm.
uh, accent, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that adds an interesting layer to it that if it were if it were just English or it might not work as well. There is something to these particular individuals doing it and saying what they're saying that I found quite endearing. There's also a lot of comedy. I do wonder in terms of aging. There's a lot of jokes in here that I was watching it. I was loving it and thought it was hilarious, but I was like, how long until someone starts screaming about this film? Like when when the wrong person sees it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they don't get it.
It hasn't aged particularly well. Um, there's some of the language, obviously, that he uses that isn't you couldn't use today.
No.
But still makes me laugh an awful lot when I watch it. Just, I think maybe because I was thinking about this today, a bit with like the Roald Dahl stuff that you mentioned earlier.
Mm,
Um, you do become quite shocked by what was okay not that long ago.
yeah.
And there's definitely things that I read in books that were published maybe 5 years ago, where I think, oh, that's on the
Yeah.
nose a little bit. And this
Yeah.
is definitely one of those films, like
Yeah.
words that you would have thrown around when we were younger, and you wouldn't have thought anything about it. Now,
Yeah.
um, yeah, quite shocking when you hear it. And I guess maybe at the time it probably would have been not fine, but finer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think he could get away with making it now. Which,
I
I
don't either.
mean, I think moving forward and getting rid of certain words and things like that is should happen, and is rightfully
Yeah.
happening. But I also think, what are we losing?
Yeah.
Moments or sitcoms or whatever that haven't been made, that like the In-Betweeners I absolutely loved
Oh,
back in the day,
yes.
but I mean, I don't think an episode of that now could be broadcast without like the but it perfectly summed up
Yeah.
school and
Yes.
trying to crack on with girls and
It did.
failures, the multiple failures.
Yeah.
But it couldn't
The
happen now.
the interesting thing about while we're on the topic of sort of the sanitization of things and is that while the language was shocking in this movie at times, it was also a reflection of the character.
Yeah,
It's not a reflection of the actor. It's not a reflection of the script writer. It is a reflection of the character, because there are certain there's the dwarf in the movie, and there's a lot of interplay with that particular character. And Colin Farrell's character Ray does try to learn. He's bad at it.
yeah,
He's very bad at it, but he does try to learn, which I found quite endearing, and I think
yeah,
adds to that sort of. He might be an adult, but he's also blatantly still a child. He's
yeah,
still a naive kid, um, and I think that's kind of why he could say some of this stuff, because he's really the main one saying the inappropriate stuff. Brendan
yeah,
Gleeson is clearly the parent, as you were saying,
yeah,
who isn't like that at all. Um, but yeah, so I did wonder about that when I was watching. I was like, ooh, I could just see someone trying to make this today and studios being just nervous as hell
yeah.
about all of it. especially in light of the doll stuff. Now the ending is quite fascinating. It's sort of foreshadowed again. It's setup and payoff. There's this scene towards the beginning of the movie where they're looking at paintings. They see that painting by Hieronymus Bosch, where it's you have Jesus above and all the nasty people are being tortured, and it's very vivid and gross and interesting at the same time. And then you get to the ending bit where the character of Ray he's been hunted down, he's been shot, because that's part of the whole point. Spoiler alert. Sorry. Spoiler alert for like what, a 12, 13, 14-year-old movie, like, whatever. We can spoil this. We won't spoil the books. We'll spoil this.
Yeah.
But and then there's this kind of this chase that becomes very surreal. I mean, the whole movie is quite surreal anyway.
Yeah.
But the ending is very surreal because it becomes a movie within a movie, and he's running through a film set that's in the snow, and it's dark, and there's fog, and there's people wearing masks, and they look like the characters from the painting, and he's about to die, and or is he about to die? That's some of that imagery I thought was really cool. It was really quite clever.
Yeah.
And a little bit unexpected, I think. But in terms of the ending there, Ray is giving his kind of final monologue. And his last words in the movie are, I hoped that I wouldn't die. And then the screen goes black. And you're sort of left, wait, did he die? Didn't he die? What do you think?
I really liked that because again, like I said with the books tend to get tied up. Otherwise you get angry readers. Yeah. Whereas film, I and everything about this film, like you say, from the point where Ralph Fiennes, who's brilliant in it, comes in, yes, it sort of turns on its head. Like you said at the start, sort of character study up until he comes in, and then it's chase and things like that. I was really pleased that it didn't, because I imagine it fading out and a cut scene or whatever, at the end where he's in London fine or something. I was really pleased that it was left open-ended, because I think, like you said, that end scene is very surreal, and I think it fit it with that it just sort of faded out. And I mean, he was quite upset. Well, in the last little bit, he was sort of willing to take whatever happened to him as penance for what he did. So he wasn't sort of afraid to die, but like you say, his last words are that he wanted, or he hoped he would live. And I think he was going to go back to London if he had lived, and sort of accept his punishment of what sort of the inciting incident was. So I quite like that you don't know, and I think that works really well.
Yeah, it's funny. It's hard to say. It's fun because it allows the viewer to sort of write the ending. It's a bit Inception, I suppose, because he is this bit of narration in the afterlife? Is it or is it that he's actually alive? Or is he in purgatory? I mean, it's interesting because Bruges is a symbolic of purgatory. He is in purgatory waiting his judgment to be bestowed upon him, which then Ralph Fiennes comes and does the punishment, and he accepts it. But yeah, no, so it's such a fascinating movie. It really is an interesting one that I didn't expect. Some really just incredible humor, sharp dialogue, really interesting cinematography. I mean, I totally get why this would be in your top. I as a first time watching it just the other like last week or something like that, I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Totally loved it. Do you have before we move on to the next one, do you have like a favorite scene?
Yeah. Well, there's a few. There's one where I don't know. Actually, now I'm starting to think there's loads. I'll give you top three very quickly.
Yeah.
One is when he's Ray's wanting to discuss what he did, but they get bogged up in a hypothetical about a lollipop man, and then he says like, but what happens if he knew karate? And he's like, why is this old man learning karate? And it sort of spirals out into like losing the point, but it's so funny. And they sort of justify killing this hypothetical man if he's got a weapon and stuff. So very, very funny.
Yep.
Another one is where Ralph Fiennes comes to Bruges and him and Ken sit in the bar, and he calls his children a naughty word.
Yeah.
And then he's just like, Ralph Fiennes goes a bit mad at him, and he's like, I take it back, I take it back. And it just feels like such a... Obviously, like something massive is going to happen, but it just feels like such a funny, surreal conversation that turns it. I just thought it was hilarious. Yes. And then also Ralph Fiennes, and this is probably my favorite scene, where he gets the phone call in his office from Ken saying, "I've let him go," and he slams the phone down, and his wife comes in and says, "It's an inanimate object," and he roars back, "You're an inanimate an object." And then the next scene is him apologizing for that. I just think it's so... I think because I mean, he's known for sort of his harder, more serious roles, but I thought he was just so good in it.
Yes, no, he was. It was funny because literally I put the film on. I didn't pay that much attention to who was in it, so I didn't recognize Ralph Fiennes' voice at first. Until he shows up, like, oh my gosh, it's Voldemort.
He's class in it.
He was great. The next one, bam, just whacked up. Peep Show. It came up quicker than I meant it to. So the next one is we're moving into television. Peep Show. For those who don't know, Peep Show is if you're listening from the States or not, it was a sitcom, I suppose. About sort of like a irreverent odd couple.
Yeah.
I guess you could say. So I guess it follows the lives of Mark Corrigan and Jeremy Osborne, two very different dysfunctional best friends who live in a flat in Croydon in South London. Have you always been a fan of it? Did you love it from the beginning, or was it something that you found later on?
I found it later. So I think I bought or got bought for my birthday series 1 to 5 of the box set. And I'd not heard of it before then. But from the first episode, I knew I was going to absolutely love it. Again, the writing is just, you couldn't get away with it today.
No.
There's definitely things that haven't aged well, but it's just brilliant. Every single line in it is funny and so well thought out. And yeah, I just think it's probably, well, it is my favorite sitcom.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I think it was already airing before I moved to the UK. Pretty sure it was. So I found it somewhere around the 2008, 2009 period after I'd moved over. But absolutely loved it. I mean, it's one of those. It's a comedy. Comedies are hard to write well. It's easy to write a dumb comedy, which is most. But what's difficult is to write a smart comedy about dumb people, and do it in a clever way, and they manage it so well with this.
Yeah,
it's quite remarkable how well they do this. How well the character of Mark is just so uptight with his fascination with military history and war history and all that kind of stuff, and then Jez, who's just this degenerate alcoholic, druggy. I love that. Like, there's that funny moment in one of those episodes where the girl asks Mark if he wants blowback. And he's like, I'm a druggie. I love it. But the other thing is quite fun. How did you feel about the style of the show? Because it has a very unique style that really no other sitcom at the time or since has or had.
Yeah, I think there's only, is it 3 shots in the whole show where it's not from someone's point of view.
Something like that, yeah.
I it I guess I didn't even really think about it. Like I knew it was that way where you always saw it from someone's point of view and you heard their thoughts and things like that. But
Mm,
um, it never really, because I think it's so immediate in the first episode. He's running after the bus, I think, in the very first thing, and
yes.
he's sort of thinking about it. So straight away you're in. There's no like sort of this is what we're going to do. It's here it is. So it
Yeah.
never. I thought it was brilliant because I guess with books you can get straight into someone's head, and especially if you're writing from first person, it is a lot of I and things like
Mm,
that. So I thought it was just really well done. And like you say, it's probably not anything been like that since.
no.
Um, or certainly not in like every shot of the thing. But I thought it just you got to know the characters so well through it, and I thought it was like some of the things they think you there'd be no other way of getting that
No.
in the show if it wasn't shot that way. So
Yeah.
yeah, I straight from the off you know that it's going to work.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of thinking on that line about, you're in their heads and it's very intimate, and therefore you get some outrageous thoughts, like the moment where Mark is speaking to a counselor or whatnot, and he's doing the word association stuff. Like, oh, what's the first word, and what does he say? There's one that he calls the Fura.
Yeah,
But I can't remember it's in response to. But it was just like, oh my god! I think it was dad. I think
yeah.
I said dad, and he
He
said,
thinks Führer, and then he says father, doesn't he?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh god. But the other thing is as we've said, they are vile people. They are
yeah.
actually not good people. So what is it about the joy of watching morally corrupt people, which is interesting because in a way, all three of your picks sort of in terms of the film and TV show sort of have that in common. They're not, but these are definitely the worst of the bunch.
Yeah.
But there's sort of these morally corrupt individuals. What is it about watching that is so entertaining?
I think because most people don't or can't live like that because
Yeah,
you would be unemployed and friendless. But I also think it's done in a way where you don't realize they are until
yeah,
a couple of episodes in, at least, if not a series. Because
yeah,
Mark comes across as quite like he's professional, he's got a good job, he owns his
yeah,
flat. So you think Jez is sort of I mean, he is the layabout, but you think he's the sort of
yeah,
bad guy, for want of a better word. But actually, Mark is like manipulative and
yeah,
always think, like always. He can, and I think that's the brilliant piece of writing because you still root for them, like even though you know that they're trying to, manipulate a situation to get the girl or humiliate someone. You
yeah.
want them to do it, and I don't know what that says about you as a watcher, or well, me anyway. I don't know if you did, but you do. You're on their side, and I guess it's because you're in their heads, and maybe that's why they did it. But there are
Yeah.
definitely times where I think if that was anyone else, you wouldn't stand for it. But because it's them, you're
Yeah.
kind of thinking, well, yeah, get the girl or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
a strange thing, but a brilliant writing.
Exactly. No, it is a testament to great comedy writing when you can write people who are degenerates, but you're like, but you, eh, they're not just mindless degenerates. It's the
No,
fact that the show gets you inside their head and you understand them as characters. And so you're sort of like, you, in a way, on many levels, you feel sorry for them
yeah,
and you kind of want them to snap out of it and be better people. They never achieve that, which is sort of there is no, this is a show of nine seasons. There is no
yeah,
character growth.
no.
There is maybe like the opposite of growth, like whatever.
Yeah, decline, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the brilliant thing about it is, and it does come down to the writing, but there's a point where, it must be season 6 or 7, where Jez sits in a hospital and he's thinking about killing himself. But then there's a little comment that he sees on the front of a magazine where he says, "Oh, Gary Neville's got a nice conservatory," because there's a picture of it. And it's just like, I just think as a writer, how do you come up with little bits like that? Like, it's just so clever. And then he goes on to try and steal a man in a coma's girlfriend, and then eventually works for him. And everything just, interlinks so nicely. And like the stuff that, like I said, the stuff that they're getting up to, you shouldn't be rooting for, but you do.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting is the it's the guy who created Peep Show also created Succession, isn't it?
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
Jesse Armstrong. Oh man.
Let me double check. Let me double check. There is a connection. I'm pretty sure that is. Jesse Armstrong. I'm almost positive.
Wow.
Let's find him. Yeah. So he created Peep Show. He's a co-creator of Peep Show, who then also created Succession. So it's fascinating that that show is. When I found that out, it made perfect sense because it's very Peep Show-esque in that everyone in Succession are terrible, terrible, terrible people. But at the same time, that show does really well to understand the root of why they are the way they are. And it's just minus the kind of the slapstick, not slapstick, but the absurd comedy aspect is gone. And it's played as a serious drama sort of thing. But yeah, so it's fascinating to me that the guy who did Peep Show also has done Succession.
That is interesting, and I guess there's a certain amount of that in Peep Show where you sort of get to the root cause. But there's one episode, a Christmas episode, where Mark's dad's in it, and it's possibly the worst acting I've ever seen from that character. But you can see why Mark ended up the way he did. Like, he gets a secondhand shredder and he sort of has to act like he's okay with it and tells his girlfriend to not bring it up. And there's a brilliant line in that one where it says something like, "Why do the people who want to talk about things always win?" And it's just such a Mark line that he represses so much, and it's no wonder that he ends up the way he sort of does, like bitter and jealous and wanting to get one up on everyone. But I think there's, and again, it's down to the writing. That's one episode, 25 minutes, and it kind of explains why Mark is the way he is. So yeah, I think there are certain little moments where it makes sense, but again, you sort of think, well, it's the next generation. Maybe he should be able to rise above it, but clearly he doesn't.
No. And I have to say, one of my favorite story arcs is when they try to start when Jez and Super Hands try and start a Christian band. And they go to the festivals. Oh gosh. If you've never seen Peep Show, people, go watch Peep Show. It's great. It had a few false starts in America. They twice tried to do their version of it, and that failed because it's not a show that can be easily adapted. It really isn't. This is a great pick. I love Peep Show. It's been so long since I've seen it as well, but it's burned into my brain. Do
you have a particular episode that you like the best?
I think it's the one where it's either the one where they're on the canal and there's the dog there's the dog scene.
Yeah.
I'll let people experience that for themselves. Or it's the one where they go to the festival. But there are so many. So many. I'm getting all these like different flashes of moments that were just hilarious. The other thing is like it makes you never want to. Croydon is the perfect place for these people, because if you don't know, Croydon is awful. It is just not my cup of tea. Put it that way. And having these guys based in Croydon, I just thought was perfect, because like, yeah, they're awful people in an awful place doing awful things. It's all awful. It all makes sense. Oh God, I love it. Cool. Yeah, but that's Peep Show. Go watch it, folks. If you've never
Yeah.
seen it, go watch it. So the last on the list is the Blues Brothers. I'd never seen it until I watched it just the other week for this. You know how you were saying earlier, there's books and things that you've never read, and there's books that probably other people have that are famous that people. I'm kind of like with that with various films. There are certain films that I know through like zeitgeist and pop culture.
Yeah.
I've never seen, and this was one of them. Until the other day. So tell me, what is it about the Blues Brothers that makes this the one that you are? This is
Well, I watched it, I think, when I was around 9 or 10, which might explain the way I've turned out the way I have. I remember really clearly writing. I really love music, like right from the start of my life. I was always into music. There was always music on our house, no matter which room you went in. There was like a different radio station, so it was just music from everywhere.
Yeah.
And I loved it. So this movie was probably one of the first where it was a film and also sort of a musical. Or they do musical numbers anyway. But I have a really clear memory of writing out the lyrics to Rawhide in I guess it would have been about year 5 or 6, and thinking like no one else is going to know this, and thinking I was the coolest guy in the world. It's such a good film. The characters are, I mean, from the first scene is like 6 minutes or something of him just walking through a prison from above, and you sort of follow his journey, and then they get in the car and immediately put on their sunglasses and then they go. It's pretty action packed. There's not really moments where there's not anything happening. There's car chases. There's people out to catch them. Well, it seems the whole world's after them at one point. There's Illinois Nazis and there's a jealous ex-girlfriend, and it's just bonkers. And there's the car chase at the end with like hundreds of police cars just toppling off the road, and it's feel good despite all the action. I think sometimes that can drag a film down, or it sets a certain tone, but this just feels funny the whole way through. And also the cast. I mean, like John Candy, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, or James Belushi, isn't it?
John.
Is it John?
John,
And there's so many cameos of
so many.
Yeah, that's. I mean, Aretha Franklin,
James Brown, Ray Charles.
Yeah,
it's mental.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch? Because it started off as an SNL sketch, Saturday Night Live sketch. Did you ever watch any of those?
No, I thought they were a real band when I first watched it. Because I had the CD and I thought, well, how can it not be real if I've got a CD of them live at a place?
The CD.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Milli Vanilli?
So it was only after that I became aware that it was actors. Yeah. I guess that's what happens when you watch it young.
Do you think, because this is interesting, because again, it starts off as an SNL sketch, right? I always find SNL sketches to movies dangerous because I feel like most of them don't work.
Yeah.
Right. And this one nails it. And I was trying to think what were ones that worked really well, and the only one that I can think of is Wayne's World.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really like the Coneheads. I don't think that's very funny. And I can't remember, like, there's the Night at the Roxbury. That's not funny.
No.
Like, that was a reason it was a good sketch, and only that. But like Wayne's World, I think, in the chat, Frank mentions that Wayne's World, that's the only one. Oh, Frank calls Blues Brothers a rated R Muppets movie. That's actually probably a good one, because as I was watching it, I was like, this is like an absurd cartoon. Like, I'm watching a Looney Tune cartoon in live action, but I loved it at the same time.
Yeah, there's the bit that they reverse the car and they can't go for but it somehow spins like miles in the air. Yeah, rated
Oh,
R Muppets movie is perfect.
that scene was hilarious. Did you know that Dan Aykroyd, the original script he handed in was 320 pages? Like,
Man,
he's always been nuts then, hasn't he?
yeah,
Always. Always. Like, and I have to tell you what, that it's interesting. When I found that out it was 320 pages, I was like, you know what? I'm not surprised, because if I had one complaint, one, it's that the film is maybe 20 minutes too long.
yeah.
I think that's the only thing I would do, is I would cut it down just a little bit. Yeah. So what I don't know, what did you make of these characters, Elwood and Jake? I love their sort of, I love what kind of gets them off on their adventure. This raising money for an orphanage,
Yeah.
um, and this, getting the band back together. I mean, yeah. What did you make of these two guys?
Um, there's one scene that sort of captures it for me where they go into Aretha Franklin's cafe and he orders like dry white toast
Oh my
and
god,
and the other one orders 4 fried chickens and a Coke.
six!
So,
Because I watched it recently.
and I just thought that's like it's perfect because straight away they know who they are.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, I guess, Peep shown away where they're not particularly nice people.
Mm-mm,
Um,
mm-mm.
there's that scene and they'll do anything to get the band back together. So they go to the fancy restaurant and upset everyone and smash up malls and things like that. And I guess it is a little bit like, you do think they're on that mission for the orphanage, so that
Yeah, we're on a
you can
mission.
tell that they've got a heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also want to get the band back together, and that's the reason why. And so you root for them, and you don't know why you do. I guess because there's so many people after them at that point that it's funny how they keep surviving. So you just think, well, they've got to do it.
Yes.
And again, the music, every song I just thought was perfect. And that last bit where they sneak out of or sneak into the venue and do Everybody, which is a song I still love, like 20 something years later. And a song I got many of my dance moves from. Yeah, I think it is a little bit like yeah, someone in the chat, how much for the little girl? Yeah, and again, the characters that are in the band, even though they're minor characters, every bit of casting was perfect.
Yes.
Like the Mr. Fabulous, is it, that works in the restaurant? Is like exactly what you'd expect from that, and the people that are sort of dressing up in the fancy clothes.
Yes.
The first bit, and the drummer hates it and
Yeah.
immediately wants to rejoin and stuff. So yeah, I think it's just clever writing again. And you do, yeah, you root for them because you want them to get the band back together and save the orphanage. Even though
Yeah.
that the nun at the start isn't particularly nice either.
Oh, I love that bit at the start where he's like cussing and she keeps smacking him and he keeps cussing. It's just like, oh my gosh. God, that was great. There are so many good lines in this movie. Do you what are some of your favorite lines?
Oh man, there's so many, aren't there? Well, I mean, that scene with the nun where like you say, he says something and she hits him, and then she said, "Can you repeat that?" And he does. And then the other one's like swears and he gets smacked, and then it's suddenly like in between.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's some in the car chase as well where they're like they're speeding at 130 or something, and they notice something out the window, and it's just like a little bit of small talk, and I can't really remember what it is.
Yeah.
Is it when they're in the mall actually, and he's like, "Oh, there's a sale on," and I
Oh
just think
yeah.
little bits like that are just
Like
perfect.
Furniture Village or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's just little moments, and I think those are the bits that I really love. Where like there's obviously the big overt jokes, and they're brilliant,
Yeah.
but I always really like the little bits that you notice maybe
Same.
the second or third time you watch it, and
Yeah.
those are the bits that really I think make you want to come back.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely little bits where it's the sort of quieter jokes almost.
The mall scene, what cracked me with the mall scene wasn't the absurd driving through the mall and being crazy like that. It was at the end when the cop was like, They broke my watch. Because it's just after the whole mall has been destroyed. And then he's like, they broke my watch.
Yeah.
And that happens like I think once or two more times or one more time afterwards. Which I love. And there was the other really great line where I think is it Elwood where he's like, it wasn't lies, just bullshit. And I was like, that's a great line. It wasn't lying, it was just bullshit. Like, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I was also gonna say it's a bit of a masterclass, I think, in escalating like drama and tension. Because it starts off with them just getting pulled over by the cops. And just from that one incident leads to this, it just keeps escalating. More and more people, as we say, keep going after them to by the end there's just army of police chasing them through Chicago,
Yeah.
into the tax building that, and then eventually they get arrested, which is a shame. Are you happy with the ending, with them getting arrested and going to jail?
Yes, I think they fully deserved it, and I think if they hadn't done, it wouldn't have felt. I mean, I was going to use the word realistic. I'm not sure any of it is realistic, but I think it worked for me. What did you think?
Well, I don't understand why Jake had to go back to jail.
Yeah.
Only because he was in the car, but he wasn't the crook. He just gotten out of jail.
Yeah.
I understand Elwood because he's the one who was driving the car and he flees the police. But Jake doesn't really flee the police. He just has no choice because he's in the car.
Yeah. I never thought about that. That's a good point.
So that's the only bit that I was like, wait a minute, why is he? But then maybe they're like, oh, they did it together or whatever.
Oh yeah, in the comments they didn't pay their tab at the bar.
So that's worth sending them to jail. The bar scene was fast. You know what the bar scene reminded me of? Oh crap! What's that movie that Tony Kent really likes?
Yeah.
With what's his face?
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse. Yes, they were like in the same kind of situation. The bar was, I don't know which came first. I have no idea. I don't remember which came first, but it was the same layout almost, and like the bands are both behind fences in both of those movies. I was like, this is like basically Roadhouse. They're playing in Roadhouse. Which I thought was really funny. It'd be good to know which one came first. But yeah, that one was good. I love the gag that they play on the band, where they're like, they go and they play their jazz music, and all the hicks are like, what kind of music is this? Like, oh, we gotta change something up quick, guys.
Yeah, and by the end of the night they've got them.
Yeah, they got him. Oh god, it really was terrific. It's an absurd movie.
Yeah, it is.
Which is why I'm not like hung up on the fact that Jake goes back to jail, because we're talking about a movie where a car just goes flipping around into the air for no reason, but I loved it. Did you ever watch the sequel, which I never have?
No, I heard awful things about it, and
Same.
I guess it's the characters, isn't it? You would go back for the characters, but I think if they're going to be tainted in some way,
That ain't no Hank.
He flicks the lights off. Yeah, I sort of made the purposeful choice that I didn't want to see them lower. In my opinion, I wanted them to have that 9-year-old's awe every time I watched it.
Yeah. I don't blame you. This is one of those movies where I'm like, I don't want to see the sequel. I'm happy enough with this one. I know the sequel isn't good. I've had enough people tell me it's not good. So it's like, I don't even need to go there.
No.
I don't need to go there. In the chat, Frank says that he saw it at the Dollar Cinema. I'm sorry. Is the soundtrack any good to the second one?
He says he listened to it all the time.
Okay, there we go then. I've
I
not
might check
listened.
the soundtrack out then, because the music is one of the big things of the
Yes.
film, isn't it? Like that, they're I mean, it's going to be a strange comparison, but La La Land is a great film.
Mm,
But the sort of dance and the songs are the big set pieces that sort of,
yeah.
and it feels a little bit like this. Like the country and western song or scene is great, and the music's really good.
Yeah.
The end scene with the sort of big, I think they play everybody, and then they play something else, and
I
it's
can't
and they
remember
go
yet.
off the stage to it, and as well as like the brilliant film, the songs just take it up that level as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, every time I go back, it just takes me back.
Yeah, no, there's so much to love about this movie. It was a joy to watch. I'm glad that I can say that I finally seen the Blues Brothers, because yeah, it really was a lot of fun. And just it's an iconic movie. I can see
Yeah.
why it's an iconic movie. And continues to win people over. Would you ever want them to do, because we're in the age of reboots, aren't we? Would you ever want someone to attempt to do a reboot of or remake of this movie?
No, I don't. I don't think it's worth it. I think there's some things that are fine to reboot, but I think
Mm,
it's such a personal thing, isn't it? Because this is a film that I get, like I said, I watched when I was barely in age at all. So it's I guess one of those formative things that they're my Blues Brothers, and no one else could ever take it up. I don't think.
yeah, yeah. It's true. I'm with you on that. This is definitely one. There are. It's weird, isn't it? How there are some things where you're like, no, no, never redo it. But then there's other things like, oh no, you could maybe redo that, or you can maybe redo that. But
Yeah,
there are just certain things, and this to me is definitely one of them. I would be very apprehensive if I found out that they were trying to redo this. For sure, I wouldn't like it. It's the same with like Indiana Jones. I don't want to see him redone,
no,
or like remade with a new person as Indy. I'm like, it's just Harrison Ford. Just leave it alone. Which is
yeah,
why I think they keep rolling him out at age 112. To do what they can do. But yeah. Anyway, well, there we go, guys. I think we've come to the end of the top six. Great picks all around. Yeah. So if you don't know, go buy Chris's books. There is a link in the description to the Amazon page, so you can check out all of his stuff, from his Golden Age stuff, the police procedural, his what's the I can't remember the name now. The Ghost,
Little Ghost.
Little Ghost. There we go. Yeah, so go check out all of his books, and listen out for him, because he's gonna start writing for Noiser, which is the podcast company that I also write some history scripts for. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
And yeah, I'm sure we'll bring you back on at some point in the future, and have a chat about something else.
it's been great. I've absolutely loved it, and it's amazing, like the things that you sort of forget about how something made you feel until you talk about it with someone that like
Yes.
has watched it for the first time, and it's really interesting. There was a bit you talked about in Bruges about
Mm,
the change, and I'd sort of almost never really twigged about it, and so it's really cool to see
yeah.
what someone sees the first time, kind of thing. So yeah, it's been
Yeah.
I've absolutely loved this. So thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure. It's my pleasure. In the chat, just a couple quick things. Frank says he's teasing Law reboot Indy. No. Biffer says never, never, never reboot Back to the Future. I totally agree. As long as Robert Zemeckis is alive and the other guy, it won't happen. It won't happen. Once they're dead, it will happen. But for the time being, we're safe. we're safe. But anyway, we're gonna say goodnight. I will be back next week, next Wednesday, I believe, chatting with Matthew Booth is back. We're gonna be talking about Chinatown. Another great movie. So yeah, talking Chinatown next week. So if you want to come back and hang out, guys, you're more than welcome to. And sorry. Frank also mentioned to plug the podcast. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be on the channel I Want My TV Now. We're going to be doing a essentially an EFAP, is every frame per second breakdown of the Flash trailer. We're going to be talking about the Flash trailer. I have very strong opinions about the Flash movie. I'll go into it tomorrow. But Frank is a bit more excited about it. I think the actor should be locked up and the film should not come out. But that's my opinion.
Strong, yeah.
I think it's like, have you seen like Tony Kent ranting about it on Twitter as well? I'm like, I agree with you, Tony.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
He's got very strong views, but they're often correct.
Yeah, I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. Totally.
Yeah. Where can I listen in on that?
That'll be on Frank's channel,
Cool.
which is called I Want My TV Now. So on YouTube, if you search I Want My TV Now, that is the channel that we will be chatting on tomorrow night, 7 o'clock UK time, 7 o'clock PM UK time. I think that's like 2 o'clock in America where he is, which is like East Coast. So yeah, I'll be doing that tomorrow. And yeah, he's dropped his name he's in the chat, and he's dropped his name in the chat. So folks, go follow Frank and come hang out with us tomorrow night as well. Cool. Alrighty, I'm gonna let you go, and we will see you all either tomorrow and next week. I just need to find the thing so I can sign out. Okay, see you later, guys.